Home. What does it mean to you? There are unlimited meanings to what we can define as a home, but the one meaning we can all agree on is home is a place of belonging, a place you can return to, and a place where you can always feel safe. Something so important to you, how would you feel being forced to leave what you call home, to create a new home in a new place? Thinking of this, most would imagine the assimilation of immigrants in the United States and how they quote-unquote successfully found a home in a foreign land. However, things are not as clear-cut as they appear to be. This segment will discuss the diaspora of Chinese Americans by bringing to light the silences society has placed upon them. Though it was in 1848 when the gold rush began, it wasn't until 1849 when California experienced their increase in population. The Chinese around the time were experiencing poverty and political turmoil in their country, resulting in them being a significant group of immigrants who came to the U.S. The oldest Chinatown in the U.S. was created during this time in San Francisco. Here we see a gathering of Chinese immigrants and our first example of the diaspora of the Chinese in America. The Chinese were mainly laborers and agricultural workers and were a fundamental part of the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad. At first, they were mostly well received because of their work ethics. However, that did not last after the completion of the railroad. Even during the construction, we see that the Chinese were valued less, as can be noted by the phrase Chinaman's chance, which means little to no chance at all. This was coined to describe the work that the Chinese were doing during the time, which required them to carry dynamite and create passages through the mountains for the railroad. Dynamite was less stable back then, so this was considered a suicide mission for the Chinese, hence Chinaman's chance. After the railroad's completion, we clearly start to see the mistreatment of Chinese in America. A majority of the population was male, and it stayed this way after the passing of the 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act. This was a result of American contempt toward the Chinese, which kept many Chinese families from reuniting since immigration was banned. On a societal level, they were not accepted. Living was segregated, and there were also a string of Chinese lynch victims. This was what brought about the more formations of Chinatowns across the U.S. as a response to the alienation they faced. First and foremost, the original Chinatown was created in response to the segregation that was mentioned earlier. However, the Chinese residents were evicted without being given replacement living quarters for the construction of the Union Station. Once again, they were forced to leave their place that they called home. In recent times, there's still a disregard to the treatment of Chinese as equals. For instance, with the extension of the Metro Rail, a forgotten Chinese burial site was found. The bodies and artifacts buried there were from the early Chinese immigrants who were forbidden to marry or own property. They were also barred from Evergreen Cemetery, resulting in them burying right outside in the area nearby Potter's Field, where the poor buried for free, but the Chinese were charged $10, which is about $200 today. With the help of the Chinese Historical Society of Southern California, the bodies were eventually reburied in Evergreen Cemetery. The society's curator, Vincent Huynh, shares his knowledge of both the experience of the diaspora community in Chinatown, as well as his own experience with fighting to keep Chinese history in LA from being destroyed.
When it comes to experiences here, it's easy to say that we Chinese Americans are lost. Even though we've been here for as long as I can remember, we still do not know what we are sometimes. We see ourselves as American, but the way they treat us telling our story. We have problems with other Chinese groups as well. Because we can call ourselves American, we're looked at as traitors to our country. It's very hard for many of us, including myself, to find a place where we belong. Our role here as the Chinese Historical Society of Southern California is to share the history of LA's Chinatown. We are trying to protect the history that is easily forgotten because we want to honor our ancestors that worked so hard to establish all of this here. Even this house, where we set up our society for people like you, or anyone who wants to know about Chinese history, was going to be destroyed to make a parking lot. We had to fight very hard, and we will continue to, because this is how we can remember what was and try to shape what will be.
To conclude, the assimilation of immigrants, in our case, Chinese Americans, is not as open and shut as we may think. The Chinese were forced to move to the U.S. in hopes of bettering their lives, but they were unwelcome. They face instances of discrimination and disregard as equals historically and to this day. Even so, let me ask you this. Why, even after their home country has become the superpower that it is today, and after all their struggle, would they still stay in the US? This is because, in a way, the Chinese Americans have found something here. Though they still are struggling to complete it, they still found a home nonetheless. The Chinese found a new home in a new place.